Hi, I'm Alex Mitchell and I'm the creator of Cancer Stories. Cancer Stories is a video diary program which is designed to help people like yourself manage their cancer. And the key aim is to record previous patients' experiences, really a wide variety of cancers. And these are patients who are genuine, real patients from Leicestershire who've given their consent to allow us to record their story onto DVD or the internet. What we ask those patients is really to give a brief account over 30 or 60 minutes. How did they manage with their diagnosis? And hopefully by watching their account you'll be able to pick out some common themes from one or more of those videos. And those common themes might be things like what resources are available locally or nationally, or how do families cope, or how do people themselves manage with those awkward stages, either the initial diagnosis or the complications of treatment, or perhaps psychological and emotional complications which are sometimes overlooked. So overall, we hope that by watching the video diary program you'll be able to take some positives from other people's accounts, and hopefully that will help you better cope with your situation, whatever that is at the current time. Thanks for watching.
My name is George West. I was born in the south of England in Woking. My mother is from South Shields. I spent a good bit of my childhood in the northeast. I have worked in various parts of the UK, the Midlands and the northeast. I now find myself in retirement in Leicester. I am heavily involved in non-party politics. In 2011, I was diagnosed with SCC, head and neck cancer. Well, my name is George West. I was born in Woking in Surrey, 1935, but try to keep that a secret. I grew up in wartime, and my mother from the northeast, from South Shields, my father from the south. My grandfather in the northeast had been killed by a sniper 2 months before the end of the First World War. He was Royal Engineers. He'd lost his 16-year-old boy, his son, at the Somme, and that left my grandmother with 9 children to feed, with no money. So my mother, having lost her father and her brother, was sent south into domestic service. I have a sister who is rather younger than me. So we grew up in Woking, occasionally going up into the northeast. At first, during the fear of the invasion, when Hitler was expected over a period of 5 days to arrive, and he would have just overwhelmed us completely. So at that time, I was in the northeast, back with my mother's family. And apart from all the bombing, I have some wonderful memories, because one of my uncles was a skipper on a tug on the River Tyne. So as a little boy, he would send a dinghy, I would be on that tug, we'd go up to the mouth of the river and take over war-damaged shipping from the ocean-going tugs, put it back to the shipyards. So the river was teeming during the day, and at night time, when I was put out in the wash house, don't know why they thought that was safer, then all hell used to break loose as the heavy artillery on the coast opened up as the fighters and bombers came in low over the water looking for the shipyards. So I didn't have nursery rhymes as a child. I had the sound of heavy attack, Vofa guns and Lewis machine guns. But on the whole, it was a happy childhood. My parents never had very much money, but my father was completely committed as a family man and deeply, deeply loved my mother. So we grew up. I went to the local grammar school, did very badly there, and left at the age of 16 and a half, and went to work in the drawing office of the factory where my father worked on the factory floor. I went into the army. I had spent 5 years Army Cadets. I had tried to get into the army as a professional soldier at 16 until my father found out and tore up the application, telling me something that bothered me for many years. He looked at me and told me I was not the answer to any maiden's prayer. And at the age of 16, that rather stung me, but I can see now he was clearly absolutely right. So I had to wait until I was 18 to go in. I did very well in the army, had thoughts about staying in, but returned to the same company where I spent 37 years on hydraulics and pneumatics, research, troubleshooting, travelling extensively. I suppose I was very, very lucky to get that start. And from there, I was moved into management in Birmingham and spent 13 years in the Black Country, I think the best part of the whole of my life. I built up the music scene, which I'd started in London, because my hobby is passionate about jazz of all sorts. And I had been part of an organisation in London, in an old warehouse, and in Birmingham, started from scratch and built up an organisation which all these years later, starting in 1976, is still going, promoting national and international musicians from the States, from Russia, from all over. So I've lived through a golden age and been very lucky to meet legendary figures and to record many of them for my own souvenirs. Eventually from Birmingham, where I met my wonderful second wife, I'd been on my own for a year, and she came along to one of my concerts when we met. We moved to Alnwick in Northumberland, and I was lured into joining the first of two engineering companies. It turned out to be quite a mistake, that one. I'll say no more. A bit of a cowboy outfit. But the phone went one day, and I got a telephone call. Would I care to join another company, starting a factory from scratch, and spent a number of years there, building that up, until the phone went again one day from the East Midlands, and if I would like to come back to city living with my wife, there was a job waiting. So this is the reason why I finished up in Leicester. My other activities, apart from losing money promoting music, has been in politics. I sat in the Strangers Gallery the night Edward Heath took us in by his deceit into what is now the European Union. So I joined an organisation, Campaign for an Independent of Britain, non-party political, and we still exist. We have patrons from the House of Lords and the House of Commons and the Economists, etc. So the bulk of my time in retirement, and I've been retired 14 years now, age of 79, is spent mainly on political activities and organising conferences and up and down to Parliament, etc. It's time absorbing, but very worthwhile. Since the discovery of a lump on my cheek, where a young doctor told me, oh, that's only an ordinary cyst and nothing to worry about, and I went happily on my way until about 3 months later, it was discovered that it was quite sinister. Since the operations, and I've had now just my fourth, as soon as I had the first major operation, as soon as I came out wondering what on earth I should do to try and rehabilitate myself. Sarah Harris, the speech therapist at the Royal Infirmary, has been a tremendous help. But my first attempt was to stumble across an international forum, no doctors on that website, people from around the world sharing experiences for this sort of operation where the parotid gland has been removed and nerve. I'm unusual. Most people have the nerve grafted. Mine has been severed completely. So fortunately for them, I'm in a much more serious condition than most of them. But there's always people coming onto that site and needing help. From there, I started an offshoot UK website. And from there, I was asked to join the user council of the national charity Changing Faces, where we meet in different cities. And Changing Faces is very good at helping to train professionals about the emotional impact of all of this and so on. I find that interesting, but my greatest interest, starting from about 4 or 5 months ago, along with Sarah Harris, is to form a local head and neck surgery cancer support group. And that is well underway, and I have high hopes that we can expand and build upon that, because I attach the greatest importance in all of this, in meeting people face to face. If I can compact my 3 years of experience into 30 minutes sitting with someone, then it's going to save an awful lot of heartache and an awful lot of time. In a nutshell, that's where I am now.
So George, thanks for coming in today and sharing your story with myself and the viewers. We appreciate you spending this time with us. I mean, there's quite a few questions that we could ask because we've not met before. Could you tell the story about how the cancer was picked up? What were the first signs?
I had a lump on my cheek and I went to see local young GP. I don't attach any blame to the fact that he said, oh, it's an ordinary cyst and nothing to worry about. It was an opinion. I went happily on my way. That was in an autumn. In the following January, on a routine checkup in dermatology through just little bits of skin cancer, it was spotted straight away that it was extremely serious. And at that point, I was rushed into a 20-minute bit of surgery under a local anaesthetic, an awful lot of pushing and pulling, which I sense actually thrilled the cancer cells, because I had to undergo major surgery in the May of that year.
How satisfied were you with the way it was picked up and diagnosed?
As I say, I can understand that doctors don't want to keep on making referral after referral and get themselves a bad reputation. But in retrospect, it's far better to spend that time and that money on too many and unnecessary referrals than have to go through all the tremendous expense. I'm not thinking about the effect upon me, but the cost to the taxpayer, the enormous amount of effort for which I'm appreciative that's had to be put into keeping me alive.
Yes.
That, I'm sure, that could have been avoided by early intervention.
So what you're saying, rather than for clinicians to be too worried about making a mistake, being overcautious, they should, if they're not sure at all, get the investigations or referral done so that there can be a clarity as soon as possible.
Yes, I completely agree. I think I attach a bit of blame to myself and my generation, because I'm of a generation when the doctor is almost on a par with God and you don't question. So this is quite true. This is a generation thing.
Yeah.
And so on. So you tend to take an opinion as being fact.
I know what you're saying.
And now what I've discovered with younger people, all credit to them, and especially if they're from America, it's question, question, question. So I always say to people now, and I say it to people I meet, if ever you get a little lump on your cheek and your doctor says there's nothing to worry about, please find yourself another doctor, get another opinion.
A second opinion can be useful at times.
Yes.
So going back to your personal case, what was the next step after that initial diagnosis?
In the January, I had that 20-minute operation under a local anaesthetic. I was very puzzled because there was an awful lot of pushing and pulling going on here. It was never explained.
Was this in the hospital?
In the hospital, in the theatre.
In the hospital, yeah.
Yes. I really didn't understand, and it was not explained. I was told that I would hear from the hospital, and then sometime later I had a letter calling me back because they had found that it was quite serious, and then I was scheduled for major surgery.
Do you know how long the delay was in that case?
From the January to my operation was in the May. That operation was cancelled once. And after it was cancelled, I then started to bleed profusely. It erupted. I called out an ambulance one night, but they couldn't help me. And I was on the point of having the next date cancelled as well. But luckily, that was, during the course of the day, reversed, and I was taken in.
Can you shed any light on the cause of the cancellation?
Well, no, not really. But from what I now understand, because in my most recent one, I was told I could go in and be prepared, but until 12 o'clock, they wouldn't even be sure there would be a bed available. So I would imagine it was more to do with having the space, the bed, and the nursing staff available on the ward after the operation.
Yes.
As far as the lead up to the operation is concerned, I know that things vary from surgeon to surgeon. Some find it easier to talk than others. And I will say that I had very little information available to me. Would you like me to tell you about that? I was drawn a little grad. I'd never heard of parotid before, but I was told there were two surgeons. One said to the other, "Oh, we could do a flap." I said, "Well, what's a flap?" And he said, "We'll take a bit off your chest." That was it. So after the operation, to come round and to find that the flap was actually the pectoralis, that's right, major, the muscle that controls, because I can't get that arm up, and I am left-handed.
Yes, that is the chest muscle.
So that's all been pulled up, so my left shoulder now is 2 inches lower than the other one. I lost my ear, so my balance went. And that's been probably the most difficult part of my recovery.
So is it the case you'd prefer to have been further informed or warned about what was going to happen? Or are you saying that there could have been an alternative procedure that was perhaps not offered in quite the same way?
There was no discussion about any alternative if an alternative existed.
Okay.
I have to trust professional adjustment in that respect. But I do feel, I think a lot depends on the character of the patient. Some people are frightened out of their wits and don't want to know.
Yeah.
Someone like myself wants to know the detail. I have to say, having gone through the army, the one thing that's been drilled out of me is fear. The fear has got to be concealed. I would rather know, I would rather be prepared.
So you're an information person. You'd like to be fully informed and hear exactly where things are at.
Absolutely. I mean, to come around after an operation and leaving hospital thinking, what on earth do I do now? You know?
So in general terms, do you think in the NHS and healthcare providers in general should be given a little bit more information than they do on average?
Yes. Definitely.
And what about the information that's generally available out there on the internet, you know, that you can find by your own curiosity? Is that a compensation for that?
I don't know how I found it. I stumbled across the international website.
Yeah.
Parotid Patients Forum.
For the parotid,
and from there,
gland, yes.
In sharing information about what do you do about your teeth,
Yeah.
and all of that, and what sort of equipment like water pick, pressure jetting, and all of that
was useful. So you got a lot of additional useful information from the kind of peer support website.
Oh yes.
Did you have the backup from the hospital in terms of aftercare?
The backup from the hospital came from the speech therapist.
Yes.
And also the nutritionist.
Yes.
Nutritionist, I became quite addicted to Fortizan. My weight fell to way below what it was at the age of 18 when I went in the army. I still haven't got my full weight back.
This is a build-up drink that you're mentioning.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were using that to keep the weight as stable as you could anyway.
I tried to get my weight back up.
Yes, exactly.
At the same time, trying to find my balance.
Yeah.
The physio in the hospital, great. As soon as they realised that I could go downstairs step by step instead of falling from top to bottom, that was it. They gave me some exercises for my arm and so on. But in the main, it was speech.
So let's come back to the operation itself.
Yes.
Before we come on to how you've done afterwards. So the operation, what did they actually do during the operation, as far as you're aware?
I've asked to see the notes, and there's very little information there. The gland has been removed. My ear, I was told that they almost went down to the bone. Don't know what that actually means. My left ear was removed, thankfully sticking out like a railway signal. Now I've got something I can put my driving glasses on without those falling off the end of my nose. So that basically, the nerve was cut. I now understand that it is fairly common procedure for the nerve to be grafted, but it may well be that there wasn't time, there may have been other pressures, there may have been medical reasons why that nerve wasn't grafted, and so on. So I've had to put up with the additional difficulties of losing muscle, losing nerve, with my eye drooping, and more importantly, the side of my mouth beginning to drop.
Yes.
And my skin has begun to stretch more and more. So food was falling out. I had to drink through a straw. I couldn't drink any other way.
So what have they said about these complications? Have you had to have further revisions of the surgery in order to address these complications?
Have I?
Had to have further revisions of the surgery?
Yes, 3 weeks ago. And it was at my request, and I can't praise the plastic surgeon enough. He's an amazing man. There were discussions about how the corner of my mouth could be lifted. At the same time, again at my request, a gold weight was put into my upper eyelid because I can now close my eye completely, and there's less chance of ulceration at night and so on. So, yeah, the surgery 3 weeks ago was to remove some of the excess flesh. It was low risk, non-invasive, and just full of. Unfortunately, it's left a gap here. So I can't say my V's and V's. I tried to say to my wife, because I couldn't drink after the operation without trenching myself. I had to say to my wife, I need a baby's viv, and I had to say it several times before she knew. But to overcome that, my son rushed around and via courier got this remarkable thing to me, little hole in the top, it's ingenious. So I can put my finger there, put that into my mouth, measure how much I want, hold my head back. I could now drink.
Yes.
I won't die of thirst.
No, that's a nice, simple, practical solution.
Yes, it may well be, perhaps a little bit more can be done later.
Yeah.
Well, I'm beginning to think I've had enough of surgery. It's 4 lots in 3 years.
So you had to have 4 procedures all together.
Yes.
Which is a lot of setbacks and then recovery periods.
And I'm no longer, you may have noticed, I'm no longer a young man. Also, there was a slight worry on my part because after the major operation I had 4 weeks radiotherapy.
Yeah.
And what you're told about radiotherapy, if I may say this, is that radiotherapy, the effects peak in a month and then tail off. No, they don't. Not in my case. I live with that every day. So every day I feel as though I've been kicked in the side of my face. But I comfort myself by always remembering there's so many people far worse off.
So what you're referring to there is the late effects of radiotherapy, which are increasingly known. Obviously, these are effects that go on for many months, perhaps years after the end of treatment.
Yes.
In your case, when did the radiotherapy come to an end?
In July, I had my operation in 2011. In the May, I had my radiotherapy in the July.
Right. So, well, it's several years ago that you had the radiotherapy.
Yeah.
Because it's...
And of course, what was interesting, because I'd read so much about not having surgery after radiotherapy, but the surgeon here was quite confident that it was outside the arc.
Yeah.
And so far, so good. But I was very worried about having surgery after because of what I'd read.
Yeah.
Not that there's a great deal of information, because I've tried to research that.
Yeah. So I was hearing there about, you know, numerous complications and setbacks really that you had in that initial recovery period. Anything that is really valuable for the viewer to hear, tips or things that were unexpected in a way? Imagine, you know, there's other people facing this situation.
Well, I think the most valuable thing about all of this is the surgeons never got to my sense of humour. So it is a sense of humour that carries one through no matter what the difficulties are, trying, difficult though it is, to see the funny side. For example, when I first saw my chest, and other than doctors and nurses, not even my wife is allowed to see my chest now, my comment to the surgeon was, "Where's my nipple? My God, this is going to make breastfeeding very difficult now," because it took me some time even to find my nipple. So things like that. The biggest difficulty by far was the loss of the sense of balance.
Yes.
And that has taken, it's not perfect now. It has taken almost 3 years. And at first, I'm sure my neighbours thought, there he is, going down the road, smashed out of his mind, drunk at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I've collected walking sticks. And an interesting thing about that is that at the age of 24, 50 odd years ago, I was in the Cotswolds and saw a walking stick that I was attracted to. And I thought that would be handy when I'm an old man. And for 50 years it's been carried from house to house, so it's now part of my collection. And I've collected others that have got brass headings on, very useful for being out late at night if I need to use it, or getting passage through crowds and so on. So having to use a walking stick now, I use it as almost a third leg if I have to step down. I don't really need it for walking, but it has taken a long, long time to get the balance. It really has. Hearing, I went to a private clinic to have some electronic tests done to see whether the sound, whether equipment could be provided, I forget what they call it, on this side to transfer to that side. And it was very expensive, and I'm sure in many cases it's successful. And all the tests that were done indicated that it would be very useful to have something attached to this to carry the sound to the other receiver. In effect, it wouldn't stay in place, and the whole thing was a complete failure. But again, it was worth trying, and I'm sure it's successful for some people. The other thing about radiotherapy, they say you won't lose your hair. Well, and also hearing. I have found that my hearing in that one good ear is slowly but surely deteriorating. Now, this is not to say it wouldn't have deteriorated at my age anyway. And it might have deteriorated as I've stood in front of so many huge big orchestras at full volume.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I do think radiotherapy's had an effect in that respect. So struggling with hearing, especially in crowded restaurants, it's a most extraordinary thing to experience when sound is compacted into one ear. So as I'm talking now, I can hear you pretty well. If I'm in a restaurant, I'm going to hear so many other sounds coming in. I can't hear the person in front of me. But I'm going through a process of finding out what can be done to improve that with up-to-date modern hearing aids and so on. So those have been the major problems. The other problems are to do with adjustment, the reactions of other people.
Why don't we come on to that now, which is a very important topic.
Yes.
What was your observation about how people related to you after you were back at home and started to venture out again?
Well, one of the earliest, there's two incidents I will forever remember. The first one, I was at a jazz festival, and a friend of mine said towards the end of the day, "I'll say goodbye to you now in case I never see you again." That really creased me up, and I started to laugh, and my friend, she blushed when she realised what she'd said. The other one was a bit naughty. I went into a chemist shop to collect some medication, and she was physically a well-endowed lady. I'll say no more. I think you get the idea. And she leant right the way over the counter, right the way over. She supported herself on her elbows so that she could get her head close up to me, to the side of my head, and very loudly, so that other people in the shop could hear, she said, "Good God, what's happened to your face?" I bit my lip. I always said, "Good God, what's happened to your breasts?" So those two, and there have been many others that have come up. You learn the defensive mechanisms, and you use humour in most cases to combat the intrusions that inevitably come the way. I have spent 4 years as a welcomer at Leicester Cathedral on Thursdays, giving people an idea of the history of the place. One of the things that I found very quickly was that it's essential, this is an important lesson, it is essential when meeting people for the first time not to give them even milliseconds to decide on their reaction to my disfigurement. That I must break the ice straight away, to make light of it, you know, in some way or other, get a smile going and break through that barrier of embarrassment or whatever no matter how they might react.
And can you say how you do that?
Yes, I mean, I can say, for example, "I hope you can understand me." And they say, "Of course I can." And I say, because I have often a great deal of trouble understanding myself. It's little things like that. On very rare occasions, when the intrusion, there's a difference between a look and a stare. There's a difference between curiosity from a child and unwanted curiosity from an adult. You've got to, the children, it's very natural. And I find that once they come up and they say, "What's happened to your face?" And I explain, and they go away and carry on playing. You know, it's simple. In rare cases, when people are too intrusive, on the bus or wherever, then I have a very special hard stare, an evil one, stare them out, stare back. But that's a little unusual.
Yeah. But you do find, though, there are occasions when you do get an unpleasant reaction.
Yes, it's inevitable. And from the beginning of time, when meeting people for the first time, I lived near the Scottish border, and the story was that the English went over the border to steal the sheep, and the Scots came down to steal the women. And it was important to know the person coming towards you was the person coming to ask for help in friendship, or was the person coming to destroy you. So the reactions, assessing, you know, make up a decision about how you're going to react to this person.
Yes, it's important.
So it's very important, and it happens so quickly, etc. So there's a big study going on, of which I've been asked to write and contribute to a book on stigma, etc. Because we are, what I can tell you what really makes me angry, when I'm in a restaurant with my wife, and the waiter or waitress ignores me and talks to my wife, etc. Now, they are taking their lives in their hands when they do this. I am not mentally retarded. I'm not a non-person. There's that wonderful radio program by Peter White, who was blind?
Yes.
Does he take sugar,
yes.
etc.? I'll have none of that nonsense, etc. So we have to get that one straight.
Now, what's happening there, to break that down? I mean, my impression of what's happening there is that somebody's judging you by your appearance and then extrapolating that into your whole persona.
Oh, yes.
And then they're judging, I'll just make it easy and talk to, this person's relative without asking you anything.
Our face is the most important part of our body when it comes to that sort of assessment and so on. And the Chinese knew of this, and the Chinese words to cover this, and now since the late 1800s have entered into the English vocabulary. I can't remember the Chinese words, but in translation it's saving face and losing face. And when this happens, you have lost face, and so on, literally. But that has other connotations, and to do with perhaps you're unintelligent, you whatever.
Yes, because in society we tend to excessively judge people by their looks, unfortunately.
People are always, it's a matter of confidence building. People are always trying to present themselves in the best possible way.
Sure.
This is why I say I don't have to be old and scruffy. I can be old, I don't have to be scruffy, and so on. Put it that way, and so on. And of course, fortunes are spent on making people look better, because when they look better, they feel more confident.
Now, I'm interested in the reverse about positive reactions. Do you get some positive interactions when you go out?
Yes, I tend not to take too much notice of them, because I do get, my goodness, how well you look.
Yeah. So from friends or acquaintances or colleagues, sometimes a positive reaction can be meaningful and helpful, but sometimes it might be superficial.
Yes, something springs to mind. I think you're an inspiration. I think you're very brave. Bravery doesn't come into this. Bravery doesn't come into it when there really isn't anything other. Bravery was my 16-year-old uncle being told to go over the top at the sun when he knew what was facing him, and he wouldn't see the sunset again. That's bravery. So when people say, "Oh, you're brave," or "You're an inspiration," no, I am what I am.
But still, people might see how you've coped with the situation, which is adverse. The population is scared of what you've been through. They might see you managing, at least as far as we can tell, fairly well on certain days. And then they might say, well, then perhaps I could do the same, perhaps I could cope. In other words, they might take you as a positive example.
I think it is so important for us to present, no matter how you're feeling, to present the whole thing in a very positive, confidence-building manner. The other feelings of my looking in the morning in the mirror and thinking, my God, you're an ugly soul, that's for me.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone else.
No.
That. So the two things are separate.
Yeah.
And so on. So feeling down and low, transient. Always try to see the funny side. Being out and about. Don't sit at home. Very important. If we come on to talking about a support group and supporting other people.
Yes.
When we first started a support group locally, 3 ladies came in, mother and 2 daughters. And the mother from an African country, part of the culture probably, to be particularly concerned about the face. And she didn't look too badly disfigured. They had an enormous job of getting her out of the house. And I found myself talking to her and saying, please, 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 don't let this rule the rest of your life.
Well, then that's a very good point, that there's a lot of people with a certain degree of change in their appearance who really are very afraid of going out after that moment.
I have one, and I say this in all seriousness for a change, I have one big benefit in all of this. From the time I was a small child, I never had a very high appearance of my looks.
Yes.
And that was certainly confirmed by my lack of girlfriends when I was growing up. So I think with that behind me, it didn't fuss me too much to find that, you know, there was a further difficulty. But someone who was born and growing up, thinking even a small bit of acne is the end of the world, then I can understand it could be quite devastating.
Yes. What about the concept of desensitization, which means essentially something's painful initially, but by being exposed to it for a long time, it becomes less and less of an issue. Can that have an effect in relation to appearance? So on a personal level, do you find that people who see you very regularly, maybe close family, really the appearance is no longer an issue because they're now used to the new you in appearance terms?
People, it isn't just a matter of appearance, it's personality. And once people have made up their mind about you as a person, whether they like you or dislike you or whatever, that tends to last. The other thing I find is that as time goes by, and I tend to go down the same streets, I tend to go in the same shops.
Exactly.
People are now used to me, etc. Interesting that the two surgeons at the very beginning, when they were deciding what to do, their concern seemed to be that the flap coming from my chest would be white amongst a weather-beaten complexion. So at first, people were reacting to me because this was white and this was reddish. Now that's toned down, so that's also been part of people not paying so much attention.
Yes, I can see that. Now, one very important area is about how you can regain your function, which is basically how do you restart activities, and are they new things or are they previous interests? It's important because doing something gives you a role and it's a focus away from your ill health or your medical concerns.
Yes.
So what did you find, when your health started to become more stable after the 4 operations, in terms of what you could do?
What I found was that I was making progress bit by bit. That I could go out and do a little bit in the garden and then extend it a bit further. I still haven't quite been able to get to a point where I can easily change the light bulb, but given a bit of support, I can change a light bulb. So it has been a slow bit by bit progression. I tried to catch a bus once by running towards it. I took 3 steps and always fell on the ground. I think I'm not far off trying to run, but I'll make sure it will be a soft landing. So I haven't got that far yet. It's a very slow progress. However, what hasn't been affected, some of my friends might disagree, is that my brain still works as it did before.
Yes.
So I still have ambition about things that need to be done politically and in other areas of life. There is things still to be achieved. My life is not over. It's coming to an end patently, but it's not over.
Quite right. So you've got time left, and we don't know how long, but it's important to use that in a way that is valuable to you and still gives you meaning, isn't it?
God will decide when my life comes to an end. I believe, strangely, that I have been given cancer, I have been given this for a reason. It's been damned hard at times to figure out the reason, but other opportunities have opened up.
Yep.
So I've fairly quickly returned to going up and down to Parliament, to the political meetings and all that, and so. I found in March of 2008 and 13, yes, 2013, I was telephoned by a radio station. Would I like to do a 2-hour broadcast on all my musical memories, bringing in recordings of concerts that I've promoted and so on? I was a bit apprehensive, but I did it. And the people were very kind, saying that came over pretty well. But what I needed were the CDs, which I have at home.
Yeah.
And with modesty, I can listen to that and say, well, I did reasonably all right.
Yeah.
That was a big step in confidence building. So the confidence comes bit by bit. Similarly, I had been chairman of the national organisation for quite a time, and Lord Stoddart of Swindon, an amazing man who still sits in the Lords, retired, and my colleagues decided that they would elect me to that position. I jokingly said, perhaps it's because you think this old codger is not going to last much longer, but I'm back in amongst the thick of it, and so on. Most important of all, I think, is turning this around. It's actually happened to me, and now I've got to turn it around and make it something of me. And in that respect, the formation of the local head and neck support group is an area of very interesting activity. It is almost, it's a room where we can meet once a month, where we're away from unwanted attention, when we can relax with one another. We don't have to put on an act. And if people's coming in saying, I feel bloody awful, let's talk it through. Or I've had a problem since the night, let's talk it through, and so on, and so on. And I can think of one person who is drooling all the time, her face is out here, and so on. She's lost an awful lot of weight.
Yeah.
And I was asked to make contact with her, and so on, and she's been drawn into the meeting. So I know that she can look at me and think, well, it's not the end of the world. If he can do it, I can do it,
yes.
And so on. So, I say that in all modesty. I mean,
I understand. So
there's other people better at it than me.
Then there's a group element where people are together in one room. But is there an individual element where you meet one-to-one? Or do you just take that informally if you...
We're in the early days of development. And at the moment, if we have... The meetings last 2 hours, so it's going to fall... It's already falling into a format of an hour of mingling and talking face-to-face, one-to-one, and so on.
That's good.
And so on. And then the other half, getting a speaker in. Last week we had the dental hygienist from Glenfield coming in. She'll come back giving us advice for anyone who's uncertain about taking greater care of one's teeth and so on. I have to say, and I make a little joke of this, that on the whole it's the men who've got me into this trouble, and it's the women at the hospital that are helping me through this. Because not only Sarah, not only the nutritionist, but other people there, and certainly the dental hygienist at the NRI, wonderful. Every 6 weeks. I've come from there this morning, making sure that nothing's going wrong with my teeth. Because I know full well if I've got to have an extraction. I've only recently found, because I was a bit concerned, that there is a hyperbaric chamber in this area. So it's not all doom and gloom. If I've got to have a tooth out, I would have the opportunity to have that oxygen put into me before any extraction is done.
I'm just interested, going back to what you're saying about the support group. If you think about the way care is organised, you've got your acute treatment, the operations, chemotherapy or radiotherapy. You've got a period of rehabilitation from the hospital where they might stay in touch for a little while.
Yes.
And then you've got a kind of gap where you go into monitoring. But in that gap, other things could exist. One of the things is the possibility of groups or peer support. Do you think we should be doing more to emphasise support from other patients, like a peer network of other patients?
I I have circulated letters to quite a number of consultants now, and they've replied positively. And I saw the surgeon vice chancellor fasting this morning, who acknowledged that he'd got my letter, and great, this is what's needed. Yes, there's a great deal more, because the next problem is, and I hope that through perhaps the Leicester Mercury or the BBC local radio, there are all these people that have gone before out there who've had their operation, who are unaware.
Yes.
And there must be hundreds of these. I mean, at this moment, there's probably someone on the theatre table, the operating theatre.
Oh, definitely.
Who will, in 10 days' time, be leaving, etc. How do we get across to those people the information that the health is there? And that is what we're working on now.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
It could be word of mouth that they're told at the time. It could be a handout that they're given as a rule. It could be a pointer via a website. Obviously, this is what we're recording now, supplementary material, so that your experience and those of others who've been through a complicated path in many ways can be a lesson for other patients, so that they don't have to rediscover everything from scratch. They can perhaps watch your account and say, oh, I didn't realise that was available. Oh, I didn't realise I should be proactive. I should ask the questions. You know, I didn't know that was allowed. Simple things can make a big difference.
It was only last week that I learned about the existence of a local hyperbaric chamber from another member of the support group.
There you go.
Otherwise, all right?
Now,
that's a good example.
Thinking about this idea of feeding back to other patients, imagine that another patient in an early stage is watching this now, hearing your account. Is there anything you'd want to say to encourage them or to give them some advice there?
You will come through this. You will come through this, difficult though it is, and strange to say and difficult though it is to imagine, you can come out of this a much stronger person. So don't doubt that. Difficult though it is, you will survive. You will come through this.
That's a very positive message, I'm sure.
Yes.
A lot would be encouraged by that.
Yes. Many people, I'm sure, thought it was the end of me when they saw me at my worst. But what you see now, thanks to everyone, the enormous number of people who have helped me through this in the hospitals and elsewhere, amongst my friends and my colleagues, and so on. I do think, where I said at the beginning, that an awful lot of money could have been saved by very early intervention, and so on. And I hope things will improve. I believe they will improve in the future. One of the things I haven't mentioned, and I have a little V in my wallet, is being asked to sign a consent form when you're all ready to go into theatre. I hadn't even got reading glasses that I was using then. I was in no mood to read through all the small print. All right? So I feel strongly that consent forms should be something like a week beforehand. So you've got time to think, you've got questions that you might want answers, etc. So in my case, it was just before I was going into theatre. Could you sign there? At that moment, I just wanted the damn thing out. I would have signed anything. Yeah,
it's almost a formality at that stage because they do it in high stress situation.
Yes.
Well, it's almost like just checking with you, is this you? You're signing, this is me here. Rather than actually saying, I've considered all the options and I'm fully aware of what's going on and I'm fully consenting. So I do agree with you, it should be handled differently in the medical profession. And there are various suggestions on how to do that, but your one of asking earlier is actually a very good one. Very good one.
I would say the other thing that's important to remember, forget what I said about the generation thing. The doctor is God. It says you don't imply any criticism by asking a question, etc. As I say, the most important, the person who really knows about yourself is yourself. You know your own body. When this was done, in August of last year, that again was a tiny SSC which was dug out. Unfortunately, mistakes happen in a very, very stressed NHS now, the Vartsey report was filed and forgotten. That deteriorated until it was finally realised that that had become serious. Now, as a way of taking control of one's own future, it was decided that this would be removed by surgery. They wanted to give me a general anaesthetic. I said, you know, going to have a general anaesthetic. I want to know what's going on here. After everything else, they said, give me a local. So they talked about it and said, well, fine. And the doctor said to me, getting to know you, I think I know the answer. Do you want me to take out what I can see, or do you want me to take out a lot more? I said, take the whole bloody lot out. Said, get rid of it, etc. So I was pleased to be awake, to be in conversation. And again, a remarkable piece of surgery. You now look at my chest and you now look at my leg. Really? And that's a beautiful bit of embroidery. And I think that young surgeon must have been taught his stitching by his grandmother. He's done a remarkable job. But again, it's about taking control. Yes, of course, you must listen to advice, but in the end, it is your own decision. And if someone decides that it's not for them, then whatever the consequences are after that, then it's for them to decide. Luckily, I'm still here, but as I say, it's not our decision for how long.
So one thing I want to touch on with you, if it's okay with you, is about, well, it's a delicate topic. It's about how you can allow yourself to look towards the future, but particularly the idea that your life's not finite, and when you've got a serious illness, you know, you may be thinking more about your own mortality. But it's a delicate issue in society, because people, you know, when they're growing up, are not necessarily talking about life and death in that way. We're almost naive to that topic in society, and I wonder whether you can make a comment. You can make a comment on that area.
Certainly. I see nothing frightening about death. There can be something frightening about how we die. But I think of death as a good night's sleep, because I don't get a good night's sleep now. And of course there are occasions when you think that, why am I still here? Would it be better if I was not still here? I remember a friend of mine going to a doctor and being prescribed Prozac, and my friend said to the doctor, does it have any side effects? And he said, not really, but don't go anywhere near Reachy Head. You know. So I think it's important, well, two things are important. Not to once you've made reasonable precautions, as I've done, to take care of my wife, her future, and my children and so on, make sure the will is there. I've even made sure that my funeral service is in place.
Yes.
My son rang me up one day and said, I found a very, very old Union Jack. I've bought it and I'm sitting it. When I got it, I unfolded it. It's not to be washed. I rang him up. I said, do you know what this is? He said, no. I said, it's a coffin flag. He was shocked. I said, you couldn't have given me a better present. I will be carried off with a flag on the coffin and to the slow march of the Brigade of Guards playing Les Huguenots. When I'm feeling low, I can play that at very high volume, and my height goes up 6 inches and my chest expands, etc.
Yes.
Magnificent music. So I've worked all that out, etc. Having worked it out and done all that, I can now get on with the living. And what I am doing is, I hope, will carry me up until I, for whatever reason, can no longer do whatever it is. Friends of mine are dropping all the time, dementia and things like that, and so on. But all the time, got mobility, got a brain, things are working reasonably well, carry on. Never ever surrender. I have met men who fought in Korea, etc. And I've heard terrible stories. never surrender. So never let this get the better of you, never give in. But it's easy for me to sit here. Someone might be watching this and say, it's all very well for him to talk, etc. But as I say, why are we here? And we can only understand life backwards, can't we? We can't understand it forward. We've got no idea. We're here for a purpose. It's difficult to work out the purpose, but as I said earlier on, a purpose has opened up in front of me, an additional one of the way forward. It's just important to carry on doing what we can, whatever the interests are. One of my interests is making sure that the birds in my garden survive the winter. So I get a bit guilty if I haven't got out early enough to put the seed out for them and things like that, you see. So it's all part of that.
George, I want to thank you for coming in today.
I hope it didn't sound too pompous.
No, you gave a very clear account, and I want to thank you on behalf of the viewers. I think that many of the things that you've talked about will resonate with the viewers, and although you said at the beginning you're reluctant to be referred to as an inspiration, I think as a role model it is quite powerful to hear the story of people who've battled the adversity like you have, and you've still got a very positive attitude. You're still determined to do well, get out there, do as much as possible. That will help others, I think. So thanks again for coming.
But thank you very much, because I have seen a glimpse of what you're about, and I'm filled with admiration.
Well, that's very, very kind. All the best for the future. Take care.
Thank you.